Hi, welcome to another episode of Swarajya Direct Line. Rahul Gandhi earlier today released a video criticizing the stance of Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the economy. Already there is a talk now that the June quarter numbers are going to come out. There is going to be an obvious contraction in the GDP. There is an estimate of minus 15 to minus 25%. But Rahul Gandhi's video was not about the obvious. The GDP contraction is expected given the June quarter. Everyone was sitting at home due to the lockdown. Rahul Gandhi attacked the Narendra Modi government on the handling of this recession, stating or rather claiming that his government's take on the recession during the 2008 global crisis was better than what Narendra Modi is doing right now. Of course, the video was filled with factual errors, and today we'll be discussing the same with Karan Bhasin. Hey Karan.
Hi Tushar, nice to be talking to you again.
Hey Karan. Karan, a long time, another launch for Rahul Gandhi in the video segment, and this time he's taken the economic route. But let's talk about the factual accuracy of the video first. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, over the last couple of months, we have seen Rahul Gandhi is too comfortable, with whatever delusions, he might have about what transpired between 2008 and 14. And I think perhaps maybe it's that comfort with which he speaks those things. I think somewhere he also believes in those sort of statements that he's making, even though they're really far away from what really transpired. Let me give you an example. A lot of people think that the stimulus that happened in 2008 was because of the financial crisis, but that's not the case. You see, in 2008 in the budget, Pranab Mukherjee announced a stimulus. This is well before Lehman collapsed. The reason that stimulus came was not because of the economic or financial crisis that followed, but because of the upcoming elections that were due in a couple of months. To say that recession did not impact us is also factually incorrect, because the impact was felt. The impact was felt across different parts of our economy, but it came in a different manner. Let me explain this to you. There was no immediate impact as such because it was a financial crisis, but the way we responded to the crisis, that is where we felt the impact, because we messed up the macroeconomic fundamentals to the extent that we haven't fully recovered from some of the measures that we took back then. A good example would be say Manrega, right? Manrega, Food Security Act, Farm Loan Waivers. Now, these are permanent expenditures that the government committed to during 2008 to 2014, and those expenditures have gone up and up and up, and they had they've become a permanent fiscal drag. So that's one thing. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is that somewhere we cannot compare 2008 with 2020. That was a financial crisis, yes. Unemployment went up across the world back then, yes. But having said that, people were still allowed to go out and work. People were still working, economies were still functioning. In contrast, what happened in 2020 or what has happened right now is that with the pandemic, people are not working because there are lockdowns in different parts of the world. The first particular quarter of this financial year, we had all the major economic regions either in lockdowns or having some sort of restrictions on economic activity. So the present situation is an unprecedented situation in many ways. To compare that with 2008 also reflects the lack of thought that Rahul Gandhi has put into while analyzing the problem in question. In fact, as a matter of fact, Rahul Gandhi was staunchly in favor of lockdowns till initial duration of the pandemic, and now he seems to be criticizing the government for instituting a lockdown, which is absurd to me. On one side you are saying that students should not be allowed to give exams, on the other you are saying that the economy is not in its best shape. So you can't be taking these two simultaneous stands at the same time.
Karan, also he pointed out how in 2008 the banks of the United States of the European Union of China fell, which was of course factually incorrect, because if we go back to 2008, it was a credit crisis to begin with. Lehman fell but the Fed was quick in resolving the issues with the other banks. So it wasn't like all the banks on the Wall Street had fallen or in the
Absolutely.
European Union had fallen. So that was also factually incorrect statement, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, he said that, okay, so, a lot of people might get confused. Lehman Brothers was an investment bank. Investment banks are different than commercial banks. And this distinction is very important, because what he was trying to insinuate, or rather what he was trying to get at, was that commercial banks failed. That clearly didn't happen in 2008. The cause of the 2008 crisis, we can go on and on into discussing this, but fact is that it was a financial crisis that originated in the US, and of course Fed took decisions that stabilized the situation as swiftly as they could. So to say that banks failed, etc., I think that's incorrect, and that's insensitive to the decisions that were taken back then, and also reflects the lack of attention that probably he paid while his government was formulating policies back then.
Of course, it also reflects the lack of understanding at his end, because he said even the Chinese were suffering from recession. Well, it's a well known fact that the China was the one which actually led the recovery from the 2008 recession.
Absolutely.
But Karan, let's.
Yeah, emerging economies were quick to recover, which is all the more reason why it came as a surprise that despite strong growth during those years, India was still considered as one of the fragile five countries. We had a taper tantrum episode where people did not have faith in our currency in 2013. There was strong macroeconomic imbalances that were built up during their government. Inflation was, food inflation was at double digit because of the policies that they pursued, and food inflation hurts the poor the most. So, in a way, when you look at the entire experience of post 2008, 2009, I think some of the decisions that were taken were not really in the best interest of India's long term and even medium term economic growth, and we paid the price for it. Let's look at the way the recovery happened in India immediately after the 2008 crisis. It was driven by bank lending, right? It was driven by the North Block banking culture, where you had a person in the sort of finance ministry who rang up bankers and said that you give a loan to this person, that person, etc. In this particular video as well, we see Mr. Gandhi talk about crony capitalism, but the fact is that the real crony capitalism that we saw happened under their regime. A lot of the NPS that we are witnessing today are because of the decisions made by bankers back then, and we all know that those decisions were made under the influence of senior political leaders of that time, of the UPA regime. So the question really is that how he still manages to have the audacity to question crony capitalism, where it is in fact their government which created or which presided over one of the most crony capitalist government this country has ever seen. We saw corruption scandals right from 2G, Colgate, CWG scam, Akash scam, the Augusta Westland, etc. You open anything, you open any particular deal that happened during that time, and there's a scam there.
But Karan, I'll have to stop you there. Let's keep the macro fundamentals aside for a second. Rahul Gandhi also made a very absurd statement. Apart from that the government of Narendra Modi wanted to enslave people. कि वो आपको गुलाम बनाना चाहते हैं. He emphasized that on twice, and he brings up the point of demonetization and GST, which has hurt the prospects of the informal economy of India. What is your take on that?
No, so I mean, I think Rahul Gandhi should probably go and ask Dr. Manmohan Singh whether formalization of the informal economy is desired or not. And the moment he asks that question, even he would say that probably yes, formalization is good, because fact is that informal sector workers are more exploited. So if you can bring them in the formal sector, they get job security, they get better wages, they get more flexible hours, etc. So there is a social security net that they get once they are into the formal sector. The government, since it's very swearing in, and since its inception, has focused on increasing the formal sector of the economy by bringing in the informal sector into formal sector by greater formalization, and we see that happening. We saw that happening after demonetization, where more people were brought under the sort of tax net. We see it with GST, where more companies are now paying GST, etc. And to make a broader point over here on the GST, it's very easy to criticize the government saying that this is incorrect GST, etc. What is really important to ask these political leaders is that what is the correct GST? Do you have an alternative there? Do you have an alternative to propose? Do you have any alternative suggestions? Because GST at present is not a central government thing. It is a GST council thing. Congress also rules several states in the country, so they are a part of the GST council. So to attribute it directly to the government is very unfair and insensitive, and shows political opportunism which could be avoided. To take this point further, when GST was brought in, it was brought in after deliberate consultation with even Congress rules, chief ministers, finance ministers, and all political parties were sort of brought on board with respect to the GST structure. Since then, there have been a lot of debates on GST, in different items, how should it proceed, what should be the procedural issues, etc., in the GST Council. It is a perfectly sort of classic perfect case study for constitutional and competitive federalism coming together, cooperative federalism, where states gave away their taxation powers and created this new entity called GST Council. So if there is anything wrong with the GST, it needs to be addressed by the GST Council, which means that it needs to be addressed by central and state governments altogether. To have a political leader, who has the second largest number of seats in the parliament, come and say that GST is wrong while not offering any suggestions, while not bringing this issue up in the GST Council, it's extremely insensitive and shows that he's not interested in finding problems. He's just interested in sort of raising these issues as and when he feels like, without really finding a solution. And that is exactly what's wrong with the approach that Congress has taken.
Correct, but final. So that is something we can surely vouch for. But coming to the final point, the GDP contraction, the numbers are going to come out perhaps today, perhaps later this week. The contraction will be obvious because of the April, May, June lockdown. But where do you see the economy? Because Rahul Gandhi and the Congress for a while have been attacking the government on the economy, on their handling of the stimulus package, on the handling of the lockdown. So the recovery would be everyone's focus. Now let's take the April-June quarter out of attention because it's going to be a bad quarter. It's no surprise to anyone. But where do you see the recovery coming from? How do you see the recovery shaping up?
So normalization of economic activity is happening. The way to understand this is that when there's a lockdown, there's no economic activity happening. So there's no question of growth because you are not producing or selling anything. So your bulk of the economy is shut. Then happens the process of unlocking, which is underway. Now during this particular period, there's normalization of economic activity, which means that we go back to having the same number of transactions in the entire economy that we were having, before the lockdown was implemented. And I think that normalization process is underway. It's faster than what I originally anticipated for sure, and it's consistent with what we saw in the US, in China, etc. My guess is that the normalization period will continue from Q2 and Q3, basically continue from Q2 to till Q3. So we'll see some amount of normalization happening in June, which we have already seen, then in July, August, now in September. And this will continue well into Q3. Say by around November, we'll probably be back to the same levels that we were before, and then we will start some level of economic activity expanding. Overall, of course, this financial year we will see a contraction, but that's because a bulk of the year went into addressing the pandemic and the lockdown and so and so forth. But all of this is contingent on no second wave happening and no further lockdowns being sort of called for. It was very discouraging when I saw certain state governments institute lockdowns up until very recently, and I'm very glad that central government has come out with saying that no localized lockdowns will now be permitted except for containment zones. I think that's the right approach. We really need to get back to working because we cannot wait indefinitely for a vaccine to be developed before we open up the economy. Having said that, while the current financial year we may see a contraction, I see no reason why we will not see a strong rebound in the next financial year, and I think that the medium term growth prospects of the economy continue to be very sort of positive, bright and robust, largely because of favorable demographics. Macro policy is also more or less not that out of shape. I mean, of course, fiscal deficit may go up this year, but I think broadly it's not something that concerns me as such. Favorable demographics, capital inflows coming in, policy reforms going forward next year and the next to next year, etc. So overall, I think the economy will revive much more faster than what we had anticipated, and I'm very positive about the medium term outlook when it comes to India.
Well, thank you, Karan, for those insights, and I hope those address all the factually incorrect points raised by Rahul Gandhi in his video. And I think this is going to be just one of the more video launches that we'll see from Rahul Gandhi in the coming days, and good insights on the economy too, because everyone will be talking about the contraction in the June quarter, but of course it's mindful to understand that the recovery is on its way and it will happen as the lockdown further eases. Thank you so much for those insights, Karan. Thank you for watching.